Good morning, and this is probably the most bijou, intimate audience that I've ever had. So thank you. It's very important, and I'm absolutely thrilled that you're here this morning. So well done for getting up on time. Quality, not quantity. Exactly. Thank you very much to the GRIF team for having HotStats here this morning. It's great to be back in Riyadh again. Fascinated to see the rain. I haven't seen that here before. That was a nice surprise. Oh, and I haven't got my clicker. Can I have the clicker? Otherwise, I'll struggle to... That's okay. There we go. I like what it says on the... It said tit. Going very well, isn't it? Right, so let's get professional. So normally we have HotStats talking about full P&L data. Today we are here to specialise on the subject of F&B and look at its contribution to overall hotel performance. We're going to look at F&B numbers for this region and how they sit within a wider global picture. It's definitely been a tricky time for some around in the world, and for sure parts of the Middle East once more seemingly being dragged into a mounting crisis, which doesn't seem to be going away, and of course the impacts of rampant inflation and soaring costs in many parts of the world. We know that data is vital. There is a lot of it, and it can be overwhelming for busy operators, hard-pressed consultants, and investors who are keen to understand the plan for the future, how to plan for that future, especially in this area of the business. So a little bit of background as to where the numbers actually come from and how much data HotStats now collects. Back in 2019, we were sitting at around 3,500 hotels. So now at 12.5, actually it's nearly 13,000. So that, of course, has increased during the pandemic period when everybody needed access to data, has really hugely enabled increased coverage. And of course, that means much more conclusive data that we're able to share at events like this. There is a lot of different reporting that we offer. Before we get into the numbers, I'm not going to go through all of these, but one-off reporting, as I was just discussing, for regional development authorities, for governments, for associations wanting to understand what's happening in a specific region or with a specific set of hotels. And there are annual subscriptions and one-off reports which are available depending on what you want, as well as things like market dashboards for banks and investment houses, for example. Profit Finder I'll just pick out because that's our next generation of benchmark reporting. So that takes you beyond just seeing the data versus its benchmark, but actually allows you to set up strategies and projects within the platform itself and tells you how much money is being left on the table by department. And then you're able to track that through the platform. So let's get on to the actual data itself and why we're here. We're sitting within the overall picture by key department, and this is indexed to 2019. And it's clear that despite everything I said at the beginning about global issues, that the picture is brighter than one might have imagined, and a fairly normal seasonal action seems to have returned. Middle East well ahead of its 2023 levels. And in fact, as are all regions, Europe moving ahead by 14 percentage points from -11 to 5%, and Asia Pacific gaining traction now with a growth to 20 from 5% same time last year. Looking at the revenue split, again indexed back month by month to 2019 for the Middle East, focusing here on the F&B segments. We see conference and banqueting growth storming ahead, plus 52% for events, more than fully recovered, something that other areas of the world would dearly love to see. F&B overall at plus 12, and rooms revenue, unsurprisingly, also being driven by driving that total revenue growth to plus 40%. It all bodes extremely well for the future, and the trends for the year ahead are looking very positive. So far, so good. If we break this revenue split down now for Saudi Arabia specifically, still indexed back month by month to 2019. The picture's a very exciting one, as with everything that we've heard so far at this conference, and it's probably just a precursor of what's going to come in the coming months and years in terms of performance potential. Conference and banqueting and events in particular contributing 26 percentage points increase, huge increase on same time last year versus 2019, and that total RevPAR per available room, revenue per available room, with a 10 percentage point upside. We're here to talk about F&B, so let's break this down to the key cities and look at how the revenue split has changed between rooms and food and beverage. This is rolling 12 months to February. In all regions except for Jeddah, the percentage contribution of food to revenue mix has reduced due in some part to the growth of the ADRs that we've seen, and therefore, of course, the rooms revenue contribution that we're seeing driven by all of the hype and marketing that we're starting to see across all of our media platforms. But with all of the increased visitor numbers that we've seen, I would have also expected that change to have perhaps been had been having less of an impact on the F&B, because, of course, people are still eating. It's just an interesting fact as to what it is and where they're actually consuming. Looking now at how that revenue split is by region, and to give the type some context, we can focus here on outlet revenue, and really one would say so far so okay. Of course, with menu prices, along with everything else, these have increased, and guests appearingly still to pay up to a point. It's not really part of our focus in this forum, but I do just need to mention the attrition number, and it's attrition rather than cancellation. So that's event organisers being held to their contracts by hoteliers. And all of this is being driven by a change of strategy in how hoteliers are doing this and how they're holding event organisers to those contracts when it comes to food and beverage and rooms. If we look at this versus 2019, the picture would still show a significant revenue growth from this area. And I mean, of course, that's money straight to the bottom line as part of your contractual obligations as an event organiser. And depending on which side of that contractual fence you're sitting on, this could be either a good or a bad thing, or a more challenging thing, one might say. Now splitting food and beverage down to its component parts, looking fairly positive with revenue per occupied room ahead in the areas you would expect. Looking at room service, it's no surprise to see this rolling so far back after the delights of enforced dining that we experienced during that pandemic period, definitely losing their attraction. People want to get out. I was interested, though, to see how far back this has fallen for the kingdom, and it might be something to do with the segmentation changes for the country, where I can see a more than doubling in wholesale business, which doesn't tend to eat in rooms, and a significant reduction in the negotiated corporate mix. It's always worth looking at that mix that you have to see whether it's contributing to a change in habits, a spend on property, and therefore overall profitability. It's definitely something to be aware of. And another area of F&B that's had some question marks over it, although it has to be said not for here, is looking at C&B by square metre, depending on where you come from. And I thought it was interesting to compare some of these key cities, all apart from Doha and Abu Dhabi, well ahead now of 2022 and 23, but still quite a few behind 2019. So that question about how much conference space we really need. Do we really need those 10 or 15 rooms for small breakouts that we used to have full all the time? Is it still really required? And what might you use that space for to help you drive profits? For this region, clearly things for C&B are very positive, as we saw at the start. The overall growth index of 2019 in the kingdom is 63% and continuing to grow on last year for both Riyadh and Jeddah. Getting into the nitty-gritty now, and this starts to explain the previous slide a little further. As we've seen, it's actually C&B that's driving that growth rather than outlet revenue, which has really flattened since March last year. And overall, we see a small decline of $3 per available room, and that is definitely something for operators to be thinking about. Splitting this down even further, and again, it's events that are driving the revenue growth. Other here being function room hire charges, audiovisual equipment, cover charges, etc. And there is something here that needs attention in terms of whether the offer that you have or that you're considering to put into your properties is one that's going to continue to attract the spending on property in the way you might require. And I know we're going to hear a lot further down the line on what that might look like. And whether there is something else at play here, the growth of on-property food delivery, something which would never have happened before the pandemic. I would never have gone to my room and called Deliveroo. I mean, that's a big thing. There was a time when if perhaps you didn't have enough staff and perhaps you were looking to cut down on time and money spent on food service and you just didn't have the people, that might have been okay. I would question whether that is the way forward. Moving on to profitability, which is really what it's all about. If we look at this back to March 2019 from a more global perspective, profitability has declined by 21% for Europe and 26% for the UK. And clearly the kind of profit that these regions were used to enjoying before the pandemic in the 18s and 19s are just not there anymore. And for these regions, we are appearing to be seeing a real reset here that's posing all kinds of questions around what we need to be planning for in years to come from a staffing and from an offer point of view. Clearly, for the Middle East, we don't see the same issues here with small increases in the margins, both for the UAE and the Kingdom, which tops the chart. But it's really something to be keeping an eye on as we consider the expectations for guests, as those expectations change in this region with so many new properties coming online. When we look at the staffing situation, and specifically food and beverage labour margin, you'd say that as an attempt to move the message beyond our industry being badly paid in some regions, and where we're trying to entice the next generation into the hospitality industry, we are moving in the right direction for sure, and it's something that really needed to happen. New York, of course, is in a place of its own with high unionisation, but the impact on what profit looks like versus what people are prepared to work for and how that impacts overall profitability. That's the circle that many operators are trying to complete. It's also interesting to see the stark differences in these margins across the regions and cities, and it helps to explain why things from a profitability perspective here are so much healthier than they are elsewhere. Digging into this a little bit further for the region, in comparison with other key cities around the world, the differences and their impacts are clear. Just hold that because there's a couple of people taking pictures. Looking at outlet revenue by brand scale on a per available room basis for the Kingdom now, this could give weight to the conversation around how potential guests are viewing the importance of going somewhere to eat that offers a real experience. There's been a lot of talk about the experience factor, and therefore that's where the opportunity lies for the future. We know that where F&B works, it's all about that experience and getting that offer right. What will the new brand of and breed of customer and guest expect to feel and see when they come here? And that's a big part of what I know this conference is about. Looking at profitability now for food and beverage, which is the point of it all after all, by brand scale now, the top end of things, taking what glory there is to be had here from a profitability perspective. Possibly not such a surprise, of course, but it will be interesting to see how this changes as the hotel mix changes. And all the new development and the refurbishment of the older hotels and the local brands as they need to start competing with all of the shiny new concepts that are arriving here. And it will be very interesting to see how those trends develop along with that massive change in hotels that are going to become available over the next 5 to 10 years. We're fascinated to see, as the data starts to come through in those hotel opens, what that will look like. And when you look at this region versus Europe in terms of F&B margins, for some parts of the world there are definitely some hard questions to be asked and may be answered, and all of this really starts to pose that conversation around whether the delivery of F&B in the future is something that hoteliers can actually justify. Maybe depending on which segment of the industry that you're aiming yourself at, of course. But if so, what that offer and experience should look like if it no longer delivers actual profitability and becomes something that is just a differentiator. That differentiator, of course, can be hugely important, and in many places it definitely will be. And it's not something that we see as an issue for anywhere here, except perhaps Qatar, where following the World Cup and the kind of strategy around their hospitality development is perhaps still a little bit in question. And finally, when we look at GOP margin by asset type to compare the various resorts versus city properties for the Middle East, there is a reduction of around 4% on total hotel revenue for spa and wellness resorts. Their higher costs there impacting GOP. Beach resorts largely holding their own as they're generally seeing higher revenues overall, and both full service and select, traditionally all city centre hotels, also experiencing good growth over the last few months. Finally, luxury, as always, continuing to drive GOP increases, and all of that shows how the region really does have something to offer almost everyone. So all in all, a positive note to end on for the region, and as long as the cost containment continues, and I would always focus on that because that's what HotStats are very keen on, that we look at the whole picture, and as long as that happens and revenues remain buoyant as they look to be and continue to grow, then 2024 and beyond looks bright and rosy, I would say. Thank you very much, and that's my time up.